Today, we wander into fog-choked streets of Paris, 1872, a city still trembling from revolution, plague, and the lingering chaos of the Commune. En route to Martyrs, a candle guttered in a drafty apartment, its flame revealing a diary, open to a final, frantic entry. They are watching. If I disappear tomorrow, know it was not by my own hand. Days later, Armand Delaunay was found dead in his apartment, his body strangely undisturbed, his eyes wide with frozen question, and journals half-ripped scattered across the floor. The newspapers called it a mystery. The city whispered of shadows and conspiracies. And more than a century later, the fog still carries its absence through the cobblestones, daring us to ask the question Paris could never answer. What really happened to Armand Delaunay? A candle flickered against the damp walls of Rue de Martyrs, casting shadows that danced like grotesque spectators. On the small, splintered writing desk, a diary lay open, its ink smudged with what appeared to be tears, or perhaps blood. The final entry read, in trembling scrawl, "They are watching. I hear the whispers on the floorboards. If I disappear tomorrow, know that it was not by my own hand." And disappear he did. Paris, 1872. The gas lamp struggled to cut through a perpetual fog that hugged the Seine like a shroud. Within days, the city was ablaze with rumors. A prominent figure, well-respected, seemingly untouchable, was found lifeless in his apartment, a faint trace of struggle noted only by the meticulous concierge who discovered the body. No note explaining the death. No sign of forced entry. Just a lingering sense that the city had exhaled something it shouldn't have. The corpse was immaculate, unnervingly so. His eyes, wide open in shock, seemed to still seek answers from the shadows. The bed was undisturbed, the desk untouched, yet the air smelled of burnt candle wax and something else, something coppery. Friends claimed he had been behaving strangely, retreating into long, silent walks through Montmartre, muttering about conspiracies no one could hear. And yet, none could imagine a man of his stature would vanish into the invisible threads of the city, never to return. But it was a police report that made even hardened officers pause. The body bore no obvious wounds, no signs of poisoning, no suicide note. And yet, forensic oddities, the faint indentations on the carpet, the peculiar angle of the hands, a window left slightly ajar without explanation, hinted at an unseen struggle, a drama unfolding in whispers and footprints too light to track. Some said it was the work of the supernatural, that Paris itself had grown jealous of a man who saw too much, or perhaps spoke too loudly in his private journals. Others whispered about enemies and salons of power, secret societies whose influence bent the law and morality into unrecognizable shapes. And then there were those who believed it was simpler, crueler, just a murder that the city, in its fog and haste, allowed to vanish quietly into legend. Yet nothing about this death was quiet. It screamed in the diaries, in the police notes, in the fevered gossip that spread from the cafes of Saint-Germain to the grimy taverns near Les Halles. The city exhaled uneasily, its cobblestones slick with rain and fear, as though the river itself carried the story downstream to the oblivion of time. In a city obsessed with life, lights, and spectacle, someone had gone missing, and the truth was more elusive than smoke curling from a dying candle. Paris, 1872. Imagine it. A city still licking the wounds of revolution, of war, of the Commune. Streets slick with mud and excrement, gas lamps flickering in the ever-present fog, the Seine like a black artery cutting through the restless heart of the city. Every alley whispered secrets. Every shadow was potential conspirator, and the cafes buzzed with the nervous hum of a populace addicted to rumor as much as coffee. The world above the pavements was bright, ornate, golden. The opera, the boulevards, the aristocrats promenading like caged birds. But below, the city festered. Narrow streets hemmed in by buildings with crooked eaves, stairwells that echoed with unseen footsteps, courtyards where cats and rats waged nightly wars. Here, life and death danced a constant, uneasy waltz. Every corner had a story. Every lamppost bore witness to an untold tragedy. In this Paris, a man could vanish without a trace. The city's bureaucracy was simultaneously meticulous and maddeningly incompetent. Records existed, but they were incomplete. Witnesses were unreliable. Justice was a game played in half-light. Newspapers thrived on scandal, sensationalizing the macabre, trading fact for fear. One day, a case might dominate the front page. The next, it was buried under politics, cholera outbreaks, or another body found beneath the fog. The social context mattered. France had emerged from civil unrest. Distrust laced every interaction. Wealthy Parisians feared the poor as potential anarchists. The poor feared the wealthy as potential killers. And everyone feared the shadows themselves, of their own homes, of the streets, of the city that seemed to breathe and listen, always listening. It was a city alive with paranoia, where a diary could become a confession, a fleeting glance a threat. Our missing man, no matter how high his social standing, was now swallowed by that paranoia. Every stone, every river bend, every shuttered window became a piece of a puzzle too strange, too fragmented to assemble. It was a Paris that rewarded caution but punished curiosity, a city whose fog could hide you, but also ensure you were never truly gone. And yet, this is where he walked. He moved through the same streets where pickpockets, charlatans, poets, and revolutionaries collided in a daily theater of risk, where gaslights turned night into a pale, suspicious gray, and shadows stretched unnaturally, mocking those who dared to walk alone. This was not a city for the faint-hearted, nor for those who assumed safety in routine. In Paris, every step could be observed, every action interpreted, and every disappearance noted by a city that never forgot. Understanding the city is key. Without it, the death is merely an isolated tragedy. With it, it becomes a mirror reflecting every fear, every human weakness, every secret that Paris wanted to keep, and perhaps something darker that Paris itself orchestrated. He was known to some as a man of letters, to others as a shadow in silk waistcoats who moved through salons and cafes with subtle arrogance that grated on the polite society of Paris. Armand Delaunay, or at least that was the name on the ledger, the letters, the invitations. No one knew him fully. To his friends, he was brilliant, witty, a man who dissected philosophy and politics with equal precision. To strangers, he was unsettling, the kind of person whose smile didn't reach his eyes, whose laughter sounded rehearsed. His apartment on Rue de Martyrs was a reflection of him, orderly, elegant, yet faintly ominous. Walls lined with books, many of them arcane, cabinets filled with artifacts that seemed more ritual than decorative. Candles burned low in sconces, their wax pooling into shapes that, on certain nights, appeared almost intentional, almost threatening. And in the corner of the room, that same small desk, the one that would later betray him, was cluttered with journals, sketches, and notes that hummed with nervous energy, the ramblings of a mind always on the verge of something. Delaunay's life was structured, meticulously so, but beneath the surface, there was tension. Letters found later suggested debts, subtle threats, and an obsessive curiosity about people, motives, and secrets too dangerous to mention in polite conversation. He seemed to know things others didn't, and some suspected he shouldn't. In Paris, knowing too much was almost as dangerous as knowing nothing at all. Yet he was charming, dangerously so. Women described him as magnetic, but never quite warm. Men admired his intellect, but recoiled from his intensity. There was a sense that he existed slightly apart from the world, observing it with fascination, amusement, and occasionally cruelty. This combination made him both admired and feared. A paradox walking the cobblestones, pen in hand, cataloging the city's hidden pulse. On the day before his disappearance, friends reported seeing him wandering Montmartre with a notebook clutched tightly, speaking to himself, tracing steps as though following some invisible trail. Others claimed he had grown increasingly paranoid, locking doors, peering through cracks in the shutters, and muttering about eyes where none should be. His last known correspondence hinted at a revelation. something monumental, though illegible in fragments, written in that familiar tremor of urgency. If they find this before me, the truth must remain hidden. There's a strange horror in knowing someone so carefully curated their life, only to have it collapse into the unknown. Delaunay was methodical, intelligent, observant, qualities that should have kept him safe. And yet, the very traits that defined him seemed to have drawn the city's darkness closer, like a predator stalking prey that cannot yet comprehend the trap. By the time his body, or the remains of his presence, was discovered, it was as if Paris itself had decided. He would not leave a trace easy to explain. Every detail of his existence became a clue and a taunt, a record of brilliance and obsession, and a whispered question. How does someone so alive vanish so completely? It began innocuously, or at least innocuous enough that no one noticed immediately. A neighbor reported the faint scent of something burnt. But in Paris, in the winter of 1872, fireplaces smoked constantly, and the fog carried all manner of odors. A concierge noticed the apartment door slightly ajar, but assumed the wind had shifted it. And Delaunay himself, he simply disappeared. Gone. The first real alarm sounded when the morning papers, thick with political debates and theater gossip, ran a small paragraph. Monsieur Armand Delaunay has not been seen in 3 days. His acquaintances expressed concern. People assumed travel, illness, eccentricity. Paris had room for vanishing acts. Street performers, vagabonds, revolutionaries, but not usually men of a station. Then came the whispers. The doorman, a man accustomed to ignoring the minor absurdities of the city, confessed he had heard scratches through the walls at odd hours. Soft but deliberate. Scholars and journalists speculated. Robbery gone wrong, domestic dispute, secret society intrigue. The journals in his apartment seemed untouched, yet chaotic in their arrangement, as if someone had rifled through them without leaving a mark. The neighbors began to speak in hushed tones about the candlelight flickering too late into the night, about footsteps pacing in empty hallways, about the quiet, deliberate hush that seemed to descend whenever Delaunay was mentioned. The first disturbance wasn't the disappearance itself. It was the immediate, eerie sensation that something unseen had entered his life and refused to leave. By the 4th day, the city could no longer ignore it. Authorities entered the apartment. They found nothing overtly violent. No broken locks, no shattered glass, no blood. Yet the arrangement of the room was subtly wrong. The desk drawer slightly misaligned, a chair pushed back just enough to suggest a struggle, a single candle stub melted at an odd angle, pointing toward the window. And the journals, those maddening meticulous journals, had pages missing, as if some invisible hand had excised crucial passages. Friends arrived to check on him. They traced his last known movements. Solitary walks along the Seine, silent steps along Montmartre, a glimpse of him talking to someone who disappeared as quickly as he did. There were no witnesses willing to admit what they saw, no letters that clarified anything, and yet an undercurrent of dread coursed through the city. People spoke of shadows that didn't match the source of light, reflections in windows that weren't there, footsteps that echoed where no one walked. The disappearance was a ripple that became a wave. Ordinary life continued. Markets, cafes, streetcar bells. But beneath it all, the city began to recognize a subtle impossibility. Armand Delaunay was gone, and everything in his life suggested he should not have been able to vanish so completely. The first disturbance had happened not with scream or struggle, but with an absence, an invisible hand writing a new law of fear across Parisian consciousness. By the end of the week, the city was no longer whispering. It was murmuring in urgent, anxious tones. Reports conflicted so wildly that no one could determine fact from speculation. One witness claimed to have seen Delaunay the night before his disappearance, strolling along the Pont Neuf with a shadowy figure whose face was obscured. Another insisted he had heard a scream echoing from the apartment. Though when investigators returned, the building was silent, oppressive, as if the very walls had absorbed the sound. The journals, those maddening obsessive chronicles, offered clues that seemed to contradict themselves. One page hinted at a meeting with a man named Lefebvre, someone Delaunay described in tones alternating between admiration and fear. Another entry spoke of the clock that does not tick, a cryptic note that baffled detectives and amateur theorists alike. Friends recalled him muttering about secrets buried in plain sight, codes hidden in newspapers, and conversations overheard in cafes that no one else remembered. It was as though he had been tracking a puzzle only he could perceive, and the city itself had conspired to keep it hidden. Rumors spiraled. Some claimed that Delaunay had uncovered conspiracy involving high-ranking officials, perhaps even the lingering shadows of the commune. Others whispered about debts owed to dangerous men, about affairs with individuals whose names could not be spoken aloud. And then there were more paranoid accounts. That he had been drawn into a cult, one obsessed with ancient texts, rituals, and knowledge so forbidden it demanded silence or death. The police, methodical yet overwhelmed, found evidence that deepened the unease. Footprints in the courtyard led nowhere. Half-formed impressions suggesting someone or something had lifted him without leaving a trace. A single delicate strand of hair, not matching Delaunay's, was found caught in the curtain, and the faint scorch of candle wax on the floorboard suggested a ritual, though of what kind, no one could say. Each clue seemed designed to confuse, to tease, to hint that the answer was just beyond reach. Even the city itself seemed implicated. Gas lamps flickered in patterns that resembled a message, or perhaps a warning. River mists curled into shapes that suggested movement where none existed. And ordinary citizens began reporting the uncanny. Reflections of Delaunay in windows when he was not there, shadows stretching longer than the night allowed, and a sense that some part might become a ghost haunting the streets he once walked. It was a mystery that refused simplicity. Every explanation fractured under scrutiny. Murder? Possibly. Suicide? Unlikely. A vanishing orchestrated by powerful enemies? Entirely plausible. The deeper the investigation went, the more layers emerged, as if Paris itself had conspired to entangle the truth in fog, smoke, and half-remembered whispers. And the more the city searched, the more it seemed to understand that Delaunay's disappearance was no ordinary case. It was a reflection of Paris itself, a city obsessed with hiding, revealing, and punishing curiosity all at once. The investigation became a labyrinth of contradictions and dead ends, and the detectives involved, hardened men of logic, soon found themselves teetering on the edge of obsession. Chief Inspector Fournier was tasked with untangling the threads, yet every path he followed led only to more questions. He questioned servants, friends, and acquaintances, but the story shifted like smoke. One claimed Delaunay had planned a trip. Another swore he had not left the apartment in days. Even the concierge, initially helpful, recanted a statement about a visitor at midnight, insisting he had imagined it. Theories multiplied like rats in the alleys. Some insisted he had been abducted by a political faction, seeking to silence a dangerous observer. The notion seemed credible. Delaunay had written extensively, discreetly, on topics some men would kill to keep buried. Others suggested a more personal motive: revenge, jealousy, betrayal. But every potential suspect had alibis that seemed both airtight and suspiciously rehearsed. It was a web so intricate that even the most experienced minds recoiled from it. Forensic examination, though rudimentary by modern standards, added layers of unease. Traces of a rare chemical were found on the floorboards near the desk, something that could be used to disorient or incapacitate. The window latch, though intact, bore faint scratches, as if someone had tried to enter without leaving a mark. Even the journals, once assumed personal, were discovered to contain coded passages, letters substituted for numbers, symbols inserted in margins, and sentences that folded meaning upon themselves like a cruel origami. Whoever had written these entries had intended them to be indecipherable, or to be read only by someone who already knew the key. Amateur theorists and newspaper writers seized upon every detail. Some argue that Delaunay had orchestrated his own disappearance, creating an elaborate ruse to escape debts, enemies, or some imagined persecution. Others believe he had fallen victim to the occult, abducted by a secretive sect that dabbled in dark ceremonies. And then there were those who whispered the unthinkable, that the city itself, with its fog, its labyrinthine streets, and its ceaseless observation, had conspired to consume him, folding him into its shadows like a story that must remain unfinished. Each theory had its advocates and detractors, yet none could account for the small, impossible details. The subtle disturbances in the apartment, the missing pages, the faint footprints leading nowhere. Every step of the investigation seemed preordained to frustrate, to tease, to push the truth just beyond reach. And in the corridors of the prefecture, murmurs of frustration grew into unease. Some officers confessed privately that the case felt less like a puzzle and more like a trap, one designed to unravel sanity as much as reveal truth. The more the investigation pressed forward, the more it became clear that this was not merely a disappearance. It was a statement, a riddle, a manifestation of the city's darker side. Each clue, each theory, each conflicting testimony only deepened the sense that Delaunay's fate was entwined with forces beyond ordinary comprehension. Forces that might be human, supernatural, or some terrifying combination of both. Then came the testimony that shattered everything. A young maid, trembling and pale, finally admitted that she had glimpsed a figure leaving Delaunay's apartment the night he vanished. She described a man in a long coat, face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, carrying a bundle that seemed alive with weight and movement. But when the police attempted to trace this figure, the city swallowed him. Street after street revealed nothing. No footprints, no witness, no sign that he had ever existed. At the same time, another development rattled the investigation. Certain pages from Delaunay's journals, previously thought missing, were discovered tucked behind a loose panel in the bedroom. The entries were frantic, nearly illegible, and hinted at a conspiracy so tangled it threatened to drag the city itself into scrutiny. They are closer than I imagine. I see them in the mirrors and hear them in the cobblestones. If I am not gone by dawn, they will find me. The police tried to make sense of it, but the documents read like madness. Cross-referencing these passages with city records yielded minor coincidences, but nothing concrete. The only tangible clue was a single letter and signed, sent anonymously to the prefecture, warning that continuing the investigation would awaken what should remain buried. Its envelope bore the seal of a prominent Parisian family. Yet when pressed, no one claimed to have written it. Rumors escalated into hysteria. Citizens whispered about ghostly sightings of Delaunay appearing in mirrors, in reflections of puddles, or in fleeting glimpses along fog-choked alleyways. Some claimed that a silhouette could be seen pacing behind curtains, even weeks after his disappearance, or that his voice had been heard reciting journal passages in the dead of night. The city seemed to split between those who believed he had been murdered, those who suspected he had orchestrated his own vanishing, and those who feared the inexplicable, that Delaunay had been absorbed into the city itself. Fournier, the chief investigator, reached the edge of obsession. He started cataloging not just evidence, but inconsistencies in behavior of witnesses, patterns in street lamps, even the rhythm of the fog rolling in from the Seine. Colleagues whispered that he had become as unmoored as the case itself, staring for hours at walls, tracing maps with trembling fingers, muttering about codes no one else could read. And then the legal machinery itself faltered. With no body, no murder weapon, and only fragments of cryptic warnings, the case against any hypothetical suspect collapsed. Courts declared it unprovable. Newspapers abandoned it for fresher scandals. The disappearance of Armand Delaunay became, officially, an unsolved mystery, but in the minds of those who had delved into it, it was far from over. Something had been set in motion that night en route to Martyrs, something that would not rest, something that seemed to mock the very notion of resolution. And so, officially, the case closed. Armand Delaunay was gone. The police exhausted their inquiries. Friends and family were left with hollow echoes of his presence. The city's newspapers, after weeks of feverish speculation, published obituaries for a man who had not been found, declaring him missing, presumed dead, yet never explaining how a man could vanish from a locked apartment, leaving no trace beyond fear and fragmented journals. Yet closure was a lie. Every unanswered question became a sharpened knife in the collective memory of Paris. How could someone so meticulous, so observant, disappear without a mark? Why were journal pages missing, only to reappear in locations no one could have accessed without knowing the apartment intimately? And who, or what, was the figure the maid described? Every theory stumbled over its own contradictions. Every explanation felt inadequate. Some believed Delaunay had orchestrated an elaborate escape. The journals, after all, hinted at methods, routes, and secrets hidden in plain sight. Perhaps he had anticipated the city's gaze, manipulated it, and simply melted into anonymity, leaving a trail of confusion to secure his freedom. But if that were true, why the cryptic warnings, the frantic entries, the sense of dread in his final days? A clever plan should feel triumphant. His disappearance felt like terror. Others leaned towards something darker, a conspiracy, a targeted act of murder, an unseen hand reaching into his life to remove him. Powerful enemies? Cult-like groups? Hidden factions within the city? All plausible, all unprovable. And if murder was involved, why leave such subtle, almost taunting clues? Nothing about Delaunay's vanishing conformed to logic, law, or human cruelty as it was ordinarily understood. Then there were those who whispered of the impossible, that Paris itself had consumed him. The fog, the streets, the labyrinthine alleys, the collective gaze of a city that thrived on secrets. Perhaps they had swallowed him, not physically, but in memory, in rumor, in perpetual uncertainty. In a city like Paris, unsolved mysteries are rarely forgotten. They linger in the cobblestones, the bridges, the cafes, and the fleeting shadows of gas lamps. Even today, scholars, historians, and amateur detectives debate what really happened. Every new account, every journal fragment, every anecdotal story keeps the mystery alive. And yet, the more people look, the more it eludes them. The case has been studied, dissected, sensationalized, and mythologized, but never resolved. Armand Delaunay remains a ghost in history, half man, half enigma, fully absorbed by the questions he left behind. The official resolution is simple: missing, presumed dead. The practical reality is terrifying. Vanish, inexplicably, impossibly, leaving behind a trail of paranoia, obsession, and doubt that Paris itself seems to have inscribed into the urban DNA. In the months and years following Delaunay's disappearance, the ripples of his vanishing spread far beyond Rue de Martyrs. Friends became wary of their own habits, muttering about shadows in the corners, footsteps in empty halls, and the strange unease that seemed to follow them like a spectral echo. Some abandoned Paris altogether. Unable to reconcile the city, they knew the one that could swallow a man whole and leave nothing but mystery behind. His journals, recovered in fragments, became objects of obsession. Scholars pored over them, decoding passages, attempting to reconstruct his thoughts, motives, and possible enemies. Every interpretation led to more questions and answers. A single paragraph could spawn 10 contradictory theories. Political intrigue, occult obsession, personal vendetta. Delaunay's meticulous mind had left a legacy of ambiguity, ensuring that he would haunt the intellectual imagination of the city indefinitely. The disappearance also inspired paranoia in Paris itself. Landlords installed additional locks. Maids and concierges whispered warnings about the unseen eyes of the city. Cafes became arenas for rumor, where patrons compared notes about the impossible, the uncanny, and the vanished. Gas lamps flickered not just with light, but with suggestion, and the fog over the same became, in the collective imagination, an accomplice. People began to speak of Delaunay as if he were present, not in body, but in absence, like a ghost whose influence extended well beyond death. Artists and writers took note. Plays and stories borrowed the eerie details, turning an unsolved disappearance into a literary archetype. The man who vanished in plain sight, leaving the city to puzzle over him for generations. Some claim that the shadows he left inspired entire works of art, entire movements of Parisian surrealism before the term even existed. Even today, references to him appear in obscure diaries, local lore, and late-night recountings in bars tucked away from tourists. Legally, the case left its mark, too. Police procedures adjusted slightly for disappearances with no evidence of crime. though the change was minor, barely scratching the surface of the gaps Delaunay's vanishing exposed. Yet the larger lesson was psychological. The city realized that it could never fully control the chaos embedded in its streets, that even a single disappearance could sow lasting fear, mistrust, and obsession. And so, the man became both cautionary tale and legend. He was a reminder that knowledge can be dangerous, that observation is not always protection, and that a city built on secrets can sometimes devour its own. Armand Delaunay was gone, but his absence became its own presence, a haunting legacy etched into Parisian consciousness, impossible to erase and impossible to fully comprehend. And here's the cruelest part. Even after all the inquiries, the journal pages, the rumors, the whispered sightings, we still don't know what happened. Paris itself seems complicit, like the city took one look at Armand Delaunay and decided some stories shouldn't have an ending. The fog rolls over the Seine, swallowing gas lamps, bridges, and footsteps. And somewhere in the twisting alleys, in the reflections of shop windows, in the shadows behind closed shutters, the question persists: did he vanish, or was he taken? There's a diary fragment, one of the last legible pages, that chills me every time I read it. If they find this, understand that the city watches, and sometimes it chooses what to keep and what to release. I am neither alive nor dead, only suspended. Suspended. That's the word, isn't it? Not missing. Not dead. Suspended between the world of the living and the imagined. A man trapped by forces no court, no journalist, no historian could ever contain. And it's maddening, isn't it? The way a single disappearance can ripple through generations, shaping fears, shaping stories, shaping the way we look at our own streets. Think of the people who walk Rue de Martyrs now, who glance at the apartments, the gas lamps, the shadow corners, and feel something unresolved pressing against their ribs. Delaunay's absence has become a kind of permanent architecture, a mental haunt that refuses to leave. Some nights, I imagine the city remembering him, every footstep echoing in the alleyways as a salute or a warning. Every flickering lamp a signal to be careful, to watch, to understand that some things are better left unexplained. And maybe that's a true horror. The man is gone, the city moves on, but the story remains, looping endlessly, insatiable, gnawing at the rational mind until you begin to wonder if anyone who vanishes entirely is ever really gone, or if they're just waiting for us to look the other way. History loves certainty, yet here is a case that refuses it. The disappearance of Armand Delaunay is not merely unsolved. It is a challenge, a puzzle that Paris has posed for over a century, a reminder that even in a city bathed in light, shadows govern everything. And somewhere in those shadows, perhaps he watches, or perhaps he waits, or perhaps, terrifyingly, the city itself has absorbed him, folded his life into its own architecture of fear, memory, and silence. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next case.